All right. Everybody hear me? Yes. All right.
Yeah,
Hey
good evening,
guys,
sir.
how is everybody doing?
Good, good. How you doing too, sir?
I'm doing well. Akash, I haven't seen your face in forever.
Last time I went to LA to drop my
Oh,
friend, so I was not present.
okay. I hope you feel better.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. Let's see what we got here. Lovepreet, Olatunji, uh, Christina, Sachiko.
Yeah,
All right, all right. Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming to Zoom. I know you were sad that you can't come to class. I know. So we are having class via Zoom just because the weather just isn't good and we didn't want anybody out in this weather. So just to keep it safe, okay? Anybody have any questions from last week or anything this week?
nope, no questions.
No questions? All right. Okay. So today I'm probably gonna run through some things pretty quickly. There's only one chapter to go through. It's somewhat lengthy chapter, but at the same time, I don't want to go too much longer than I normally do. Okay. I just, as usual, recommend that you go back, look at the slides, read the chapter on your own, that kind of thing. So you get a better understanding of the information, but we'll get through this, right? Okay, so this week we're going to talk about EEO, okay? And so when we talk about EEO, we're just talking about equal employment opportunity, right? And that's a big deal for HR because we want to make sure that, within the workforce that everybody has a fair opportunity to be employed, right? For those that want to work and want a job, they shouldn't have any barriers or any challenges, based on certain circumstances, specifically what we call the protected classes, okay? Race, age, sex, disability, religion, creed, sexual orientation, those, particular things, right? Those are all protected under law, right? Under the umbrella of the Equal Opportunity Commission or the EEO, okay? And really, what we're really looking at is what we call the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII, right? That's the section within our laws that cover employment law, and the rights of the employee, the rights of the potential candidates that are going to come in and try to get a job, right? It's all about objective, fair treatment, and we don't condone decisions based on any of the protected classes. All right. Now, things have changed, of course, and there's a reason why these laws are in effect, because we did have those particular things happening, early on in our history as far as the United States goes. And it still happens worldwide, based on class or race, ethnicity, or just, belonging to a different ethnic group. People get discriminated against and don't get opportunities that they should, you know, rightfully get. Okay. And so we want to make sure that that doesn't happen on a regular basis, because what happens is when you start, you know, hiring folks and not hiring people because of, some physical characteristics they possess, you lose out on talent. Okay. You lose out on getting people for your organization that can really be value
Hello,
added.
Professor.
Yes, sir.
My name it's Ashkan.
Yeah, what's up?
Yeah.
Okay, I got you, Oscar.
Thank you.
Okay, no worries. And so, you want to make sure that, history doesn't repeat itself, okay? And as we see even nowadays, there's still some discrimination, specifically against, women. That's really where the next area is, and against, folks based on their sexual orientation and sometimes their religious affiliation, okay? And so really there's different levels, right? We have, city laws, we have federal laws, state laws, right, that all, kind of take all these different codes and different regulations and manage them, okay? Interpret the law, and then you have the courts that kind of rule on cases and kind of just make sure that everything is on the up and up, right? This is all under the umbrella of the Department of Labor, Department of Justice, okay? And so at every level, right, there's different regulations that don't necessarily apply for every state, every city across the board, right? But the federal level, it applies to everyone as long as you have 15 or more employees, okay? All right, so I'm gonna run through this, all right? So the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is the actual body of folks that manage and make sure they enforce the laws for employees and employers, right? Just there to make sure that employers are doing what they're supposed to be doing, all right? If you haven't noticed, employers, companies will do anything they will do a lot of shady things in order to make money, right? And breaking the law is not above them, all right? And so you have to make sure that you have guidelines in place so that they don't take advantage of people that are really trying to participate in the labor force, right? And not screw people over, okay? All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is disparate treatment, or disparate treatment and disparate impact, right? But disparate treatment is more about when you get discriminated against individually, right? There's something about you, there's something about the other person that, is causing, the authority or the decision maker to treat them unfairly, to treat them with prejudice, okay? And it's solely focused on one person. Okay, it's overt, it's intentional, right? And it's very, you can see a pattern. You can see that this is something that's happening over and over again where, I may come into work every day and every day the boss is, harassing me, or not harassing me, but not treating me the same way as he's treating everyone else, right? Or I'm not getting the same opportunities as everyone else. Everybody once a week gets a different project that will lead to more money or more opportunities, but I don't get that opportunity. And so that's disparate treatment. But then you have something called disparate impact. And disparate impact is more of, prejudicial action or discriminatory practices that have an impact on a larger group of folks, right? The effect or the influence is much broader, right? It's going to affect more people. And so we can talk about something in the essence of, let's just say your employer decides that they want to take out all the bathrooms, all the toilets in the building, okay? Unrealistic, but just go with me here, right? They want to take out all the toilets in the building, right? That's going to have an impact on the women, right? It's going to have an impact on the women, and will also have an impact on the men, but it will have more of an impact on the women, right? That's what we consider disparate impact, because it's going to impact a large group of folks, right? Adversely. And it's going to be just based on whether or not, they have a specific characteristic that, that is not favorable to whoever is making the decision, all right? Now, disparate impact can be intentional or non-intentional, okay? Or unintentional. Either way, it doesn't matter. It's still illegal. It's still punishable by law, okay? And so whether or not someone means to, have a disparate impact by their decision making is irrelevant, right? The fact is that you made a decision, it had this type of impact on a large group of folks, okay? And it, is reverberating throughout that community, right? And it's having an adverse impact on them and the organization. And so that counts as disparate impact, okay? All right. Any questions thus far? Nothing?
None for now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So employers have a number of tactics or number of remedies that they use in order to participate in prejudicial discriminatory practices. Okay. And we're going to just talk about a few. right? The first one is business necessity, okay? So business necessity basically says that, hey, I can't hire you, okay, because I need the decision I'm making not to hire you has to do with a business aspect, right? It has to do with something that has to do with the operation of the company, okay? And so I can't necessarily bring you on, or I can't hire these certain folks, right? So for instance, back in the day, if you ever, well, you probably won't, but on applications, there used to be something that says, hey, you know, you need to be able to lift 40 pounds or something to that effect, right? Or lift heavy weights or something to that effect, right? And so in many instances, you know, women couldn't meet that requirement. They couldn't lift 40 pounds, okay? And so I can't hire you. And so businesses use that as a business necessity to say, look, I cannot hire you. And because of, you know, the fact that you cannot, you know, you're going to have an adverse impact on my business. It's not going to be safe for you to be hired. And if you can't really, you know, fulfill the qualifications of the job because I need you to, you know, lift 40 pounds, all right? Business necessity is really the lowest bar they have to meet, right? Because nowadays, you really can't use business necessity. It's very hard because there's so many things that employers can implement that can assist in doing whatever it is that they deem is a business necessity, okay? And so this is a very, you know, very hard standard to reach. And it's really the low end of, you know, the kind of the excuses or the things that they use to disqualify people or to be prejudicial or discriminatory against people, okay? The next one we have is bona fide occupational qualification, right? It just, when we look at BFOQs, it's saying that I can't hire you because you specifically don't have a certain skill set or you don't have something that I need that is based on the job description. And so I can't hire you, okay? So there was an interesting case here in California. It's probably been like 15 years or so, okay? And just pardon the theme of the scenario because it's a true case and it just happens to be in that particular industry, all right? So there's a young lady, she's a stripper. She goes into a strip club and she wants to be hired as a stripper. So she goes in, she fills out application. One of the questions in the application asks, are you pregnant? Okay. And she checks yes. After she checks yes, the employer of the, you know, the manager of the strip club says, hey, we can't hire you because you're pregnant. But she wasn't showing, right? They wouldn't have known, if she had put no, they wouldn't have known she was pregnant. So she files a lawsuit against the strip club, okay? Now, this goes to court. When it really probably shouldn't have went to court, but it goes to court anyway, all right? It gets to court, or maybe it goes to, you know, kind of the preliminary type hearings or whatever they do beforehand, before they actually go to court. And the judge dismisses the case and the strip club wins the case, okay? And the defense they use, or the reason they use, is BFOQ, bona fide occupational qualification, all right? Now, can anybody think of what that BFOQ would be? What occupational qualification could the strip club possibly have used to disqualify this young lady from being employed at their establishment?
Safety,
Safety? Why safety?
like it will be risky for her to do some specific moves
Okay,
while she's
got you.
pregnant.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Anybody else?
Well, the strip club doesn't want to take care of medicals.
Ah, yeah, that's another good one. Yep, another good reason. Okay, all right. What else? Anybody else?
They might like you know, sometimes she has to take off, and also they might can lose business in that things because And this thing, they have to approve the leaves also because she has some problems.
Got you.
So-
Okay, yep. Okay, all good. Okay, that's a good one too. Definitely. All right. Anybody else? No? Okay. So the reason, and don't get me wrong, all those are good legitimate reasons, but not enough to disqualify her from getting the job, right? Because if she, she was pregnant and she wasn't showing, they could have still hired her, and not necessarily worry about the insurance and all that stuff and just wait till it kind of comes when it happens, right? The reason that they won is because within their, for that business, one of the qualifications for, being a stripper specifically for that organization was sex appeal. Okay. That's considered BFOQ in that industry, sex appeal. Right. And so the argument was that, yeah, she's not showing now, but she will eventually be showing. Okay. And legitimately, reasonable man approach, nobody wants to see a pregnant woman as a stripper, right? Unless I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Right?
right.
No,
It's kind of
nobody
Yes, you're
wants to
right.
see.
I don't want to
Not-
see it.
Yeah, not necessarily that, in a bad way. It's just that for all the reasons you guys already stated, safety, insurance, nobody wants to, and then you talk about sex appeal. That's what the industry is about. That's what a strip club is about. People come there to be visually stimulated. So if you can't really stimulate the customer because you're pregnant, because some people will find a problem with that, right? Then I don't have to hire you, okay? And that was the basis for their disqualification. And they won in court, okay, based off of that. Because sex appeal is a BFOQ for that particular industry, okay? And so BFOQs can be very specific to that particular industry or that particular company. All right. There was another case that anybody familiar with Abercrombie and Fitch, the clothing line?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. So Abercrombie and Fitch, they have a particular look that they want for their salespeople. Okay. And there was a case where a young Muslim girl came in and she got interviewed by the store manager. The store manager liked her, and the store manager hired her, right? But when she did the interview, she had her head gear, headscarf on. She had her hijab on, right? And so she was doing great. She fit, the profile for the most part. When the district manager came, he had a problem because he said, hey, she has head, a headscarf on, a head covering on, she needs to take it off. But then he was told, like, hey, she's Muslim, she's required to wear that because of her religion. And so, we can't tell her to take it off. So they end up firing her. Okay. She took it to court and she lost. Okay. The reason she lost is because specifically in Abercrombie and Fitch's employment qualifications, it specifically says you have to look a certain way. They're looking for a certain thing, okay? And it's stated there, okay? And so, although it may not seem ethical and right, on the surface, because they had already outlined it and it was in black and white, Abercrombie and Fitch had a legal stance that they could use to disqualify her and fire her, okay? So just another example of how broad and how specific BFOQs can be, and that you have to really, understand the relevance of the BFOQ to that industry and to the business and how it would impact it if, when they don't hire somebody based off of that, okay? The other concept the other tactic they use is burden of proof, right? So prior to 1990 or so, if you filed a suit against a company, the burden of proof was against you. Okay? The burden of proof was against you. Okay? So now it's changed, okay? I know it says individual file against employers must establish that legal discrimination has occurred. Yes, that is true, but the burden of proof is on the employer to prove that they did not discriminate. Okay, it's burden of proof is on the employer to show that they did not discriminate. All right. Yes, the individuals need to show that they did get, discriminated against, but once they present that initially, the rest of the burden of proof is on the employer to say, hey, we did not discriminate in any way. And the reason for that is because as a company, you have a lot of resources and money that we as individuals don't have. Okay. Imagine you suing a company because you got discriminated against and they take you to court. How much money do you think it's going to cost you to go to court, to get a lawyer, get all this, stuff as far as legal, representation going? It's going to cost you a lot of money. The company doesn't have that problem. The company has multiple resources, really deep pockets, and they could probably go on for years and not worry about it, okay? They could wear you out. So now it's up to the companies to disprove that they did not discriminate, right? Because they have more of the resources, right? The next tactic that we want to look at is retaliation. And excuse me, retaliation occurs when basically someone sues the company, and during that period of time, the person has to be either placed in a different department or moved away from the situation, or there has to be some separation between the person who's suing the company or suing that particular individual and that that person. Okay. And so in many instances, what happens is that whoever is getting accused of inappropriate or misconduct, sometimes they'll retaliate against the person against the accuser. And so, for instance, they'll start giving them like the worst tasks, the worst assignments. They'll start trying to get everybody else in the office against them. They will start to, ask them to do things that, normally they wouldn't have to do, which is not within their job description or their responsibilities. Or they just start to treat them very poorly, or start to talk about them, just take, actions against them that is not appropriate. Okay. When you have a situation where, you've accused someone of sexual harassment or a hostile work environment or assault or whatever the case may be, you still have to go to work. Right. It's up to the company to make sure that there's some separation and there's an understanding like, hey, this is something that is in litigation, is in the process of being, adjudicated, and you still have to come to work to get your paycheck, but we still have to work together in some shape, form, or fashion. Now, whether or not that means I have to move you to another department, or you kind of work on solo projects and that kind of thing, that's up to the company, right? But in between there shouldn't be any payback. Okay. And that's really what we're looking at here when we talk about retaliation. It's about payback because the person is mad that they're being accused of whatever it is that they said they did. Right. And in many situations, if you see retaliation, more than likely the accuser is guilty and they're trying to scare the person into not filing a grievance or rescinding their grievance. Okay. All right. So now we get to the meat and potatoes of the EEO and our labor laws, right? Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? Title VII. Okay. So basically, Title VII was put in place to make sure that organizations don't discriminate against individuals based on their sex, their race, national origin, color, and or religion. Okay. So there's a lot of different clauses and subclauses and subsections within Title VII that elaborate more on each particular situation, right? And so it's pretty extensive and covers a very broad range of things, all right? But to be subject to Title VII, right, the first thing you need to do is you have to have 15 or more employees, okay? If you don't have 15 or more employees, then you are not subject to Title VII. That doesn't mean that you're not subject to the rules or, against, being prejudiced or discriminatory in practice. It just means that I can't necessarily turn to the EEO. I can't turn to the labor department. I can turn to a private lawyer. I could turn to, some mediation arbitration, but I don't really have access to the EEOC and more of the, federal, city, state resources that I could use if I feel like I've been discriminated against, okay? Title VII also applies to, all schools, okay, public and private, right? State and local governments and public and private employment agencies, all right? So basically everybody is subject to Title VII as long as you have 15 or more employees, okay? And if you work for the government on any level, you're subject to Title VII. It doesn't matter, 2 employees, 3 employees, it doesn't matter, okay? You're subject to Title VII, okay? Labor unions with 15 or more members, the same thing, okay? Okay. So after, 1964 and Title VII, there's some more amendments to it, right? And so we have the Civil Rights Act of 1991, okay? And so that was really where we kind of codified certain things, specifically with, taking away business necessity as a way in which to discriminate against, okay? And so the burden of proof or the way to show that there was real business necessity, the requirement was higher, okay? It was more demanding on the employer to really show, hey, is this really a business necessity or are you just making stuff up, okay? The next thing it did was, whose thing is that? Turn it, mute it, please, if you can. Okay. So that also created the compensation, I guess, ceiling sort of, or the ability to get punitive damages, for discrimination. Prior to, 1991, what you got as far as like, if you won a case against your company for discrimination, it was capped at a certain level, okay? And so now it's not capped. Now it's basically, the jury will decide whether or not, or the mediator or the arbitrator will decide what the level of compensation is based on a number of factors, right? Lost salary, duress, not duress, but stress, impact on emotional stability, loss of income, just a lot of more mental and psychological things are now accounted for when we talk about compensation, for discrimination suits, right? Not to say that sky's the limit, because it's not, but at the same time, there's more room and more flexibility for juries or arbitrators and mediators to decide what is a fair compensation for someone who's been discriminated against, right? And so all those factors are taken into consideration, and then some compensation is provided, okay? Now, if you go to the EEOC, the EEOC will not compensate you monetarily, okay? The function of the EEOC, if it goes that way, their thing is just to give you back or restore you to being whole. And what that means is basically, if you were supposed to get a promotion and you didn't get the promotion and you thought it was discrimination and you filed a grievance and you were found to be correct, then the EEOC's power is to say, okay, you know what? That person did not get that promotion based on your discriminatory practice. You are now going to promote that person, and all applicable pay and compensation that goes with that position will be backdated to when they were supposed to get that particular promotion, right? Along with the promotion. So that's as far as the EEOC can go, right? The federal agency, that's as far as they can go. So in many instances, companies, will vie for mediation or arbitration, right? And you guys probably in your work contracts, if you read it carefully and you go all these to the end, there'll be a clause in there that says you will not sue us prior to going to mediation or arbitration, okay? Because that's always the first step for most companies. They want to mediate and they want to arbitrate. They don't want to go to court, okay? And why do you think they wouldn't want to go to court?
Because the court is headache.
Because the court is what, Najee?
It's too much headache.
It's too much
Right.
headache. Yeah, it's too much
Yeah.
headache.
To
Okay.
protect their reputation.
Protect the reputation. That's it right there, right? It is too much headache. It costs a lot of money, right? But the most important thing is to protect their reputation, all right? No one wants their dirty laundry aired out, right? No one wants everybody to know that the company, is going through this, right? The company doesn't want the bad publicity. And so instead of letting you go and sue them, because that's going to be public knowledge, right? They want mediation arbitration. And so that is the first thing that you have to do if something happens to you. You have to go to mediation arbitration. And then within mediation arbitration, things typically get settled out. It may take a little while, but things get figured out, okay? Because again, the companies don't want to go to court. It's not something they take favorably. It's not something they look, that they want to get into, specifically because of their reputation. They just don't want to deal with it. All right. So let's look into executive orders 11246, 11375, and 11478. Okay. And we're really talking about federal contractors and that kind of thing. Okay. Or what they call vocational rehab law, voc rehab law, executive orders, and that kind of thing. All right. So if you have a contract with the federal government, there's certain stipulations you have to meet in order to get that contract. Okay. It could very well be, you have to have a certain amount of women for the job, right? You have to have a certain amount of physically challenged people on the job. You have to have people, certain percentage of folks have to be above a certain age. Okay. They have to be a certain demographic, right? A certain percentage of all demographics have to be allowed to, be in your company. So getting a federal contract is difficult at times because a lot of companies don't necessarily meet all those requirements. Okay. And so if it's just the fact that your company is the way it is one thing, but along the way, I should say, you should at least meet some of the criteria for federal contracting, okay? So federal contracting, and specifically, if you've ever applied for a government job, you'll see that there's a clause, or there's a special section, people that, have been in the military and are wounded, or have some disability rating, okay? That disability rating gives them extra points to add on to their score when they're rated by the federal, employer, whoever's doing the hiring, in order to, kind of give them a leg up in the hiring process, right? This is all done within the federal context, okay? The governmental context is not private. It's just strictly government and the federal level, right? Because what's the thing about the federal government and the money and the money that the federal government has? Why is it so important that we are aware of what the government is doing with the money? Anybody?
Sir, can you please repeat? I didn't understand.
Why is it important that we manage or have oversight over how the federal government spends money?
Because we pay taxes.
Because we pay taxes, right? Whose money is that?
Our
It's our money.
It's our money.
It's our money,
Taxpayers,
right? It's our money,
citizens.
okay? And so because of that, That's why the government is the way it is. That's why it takes so long to, get things decided upon, because it's our money. And because it's our money, guess what? That's what the congressmen and senators are there for. They're going to decide what we want to do with our money, right? Now, in theory, that's what's supposed to happen, but we all know that's not how the government works. That's not how Congress and the Senate works, right? They have their own agenda and that kind of thing, right? But all in all, they're still liable or obligated to their constituents, and they should be in line with what the people want, okay? But it's important that because it's our money, everyone should have a fair opportunity to participate in anything that the government does, because the money that's being used is the people's money, okay? And so always keep that in mind when you're looking at the government, okay? All right, so let me see here. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is something that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. Well, maybe not, but affirmative action, okay? Anyone's heard of affirmative action? No?
No.
Maybe? Okay.
I think it's like what I have heard, like everyone has right to work.
Mhm.
Like sometimes like if I talk about like some places they say like only these people are allowed to work, or
Okay.
like n- no these kind of like caste system is allowed or something like that maybe.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of sort of, but so affirmative action is sort of that, but it's for past transgressions, right? So affirmative action was put in place to try to balance out the past discriminatory and prejudicial practices that happened, okay? And so it's really just, things that we have to adhere to kind of balance out the playing field, right? Because for the last, 400 years or so, whatever, slavery was in place, okay? And so when slavery was in place, there's a lot of discrimination and, prejudicial practices against minorities, against women, against, people that were not, Americans and that kind of thing, okay? And so those particular practices over a certain period of time start having an impact on who you are and where you are at right now, okay? So it's kind of a generational fix, okay? We're looking back in the past and saying, you know what? That was wrong what they did to you. That's wrong what they did to your, not to you, but to your father, to your grandfather, to your great-grandfather or great-grandmother, right? To your family in general, those way years back. So we're going to put things in place that will enable you or give you opportunities to be on a level playing field, okay? Now, there's a couple misconceptions with affirmative action. So for those that are familiar with affirmative action and maybe have, dealt with it maybe, right? Is affirmative action mandatory, or is it a law, or is it more of a plan or guidance? Does anybody know?
I think it's more of a guidance.
Okay.
I don't think it's a law, because I have for example, in Nigeria, there are some areas that Shell and ExxonMobil operates,
Yeah.
that because of the past experiences, with the people of the community, they have to they set some amount aside to
Yeah.
pay the youths of that community, so that they won't be, so that the operations will not be disturbed.
Okay. All right. So affirmative action is definitely just a guidance. It's just a plan, right? It's not a law, right? And people are having misconceptions that it's a law. It's not. Okay, it's guidance. It's not mandatory. If you see a company or institution that has an affirmative action agenda or plan, they either one, that did it voluntarily, or two, they had violations and the government stepped in and told them they had to have it. Okay, those are only two things. Times you have an affirmative action plan. You do it voluntarily, or you did something wrong and now you have to have the plan. Oh, yeah, you have to take it. You have to have affirmative action, right? And where do you guys think affirmative action is most relevant? Oh, I should say prevalent. Does anybody know? Where do we see affirmative action most practiced? No? Okay. So our academic system, our schools use affirmative action and have been using affirmative action for a while now for admissions. Okay. So prior to affirmative action going on, for the most part, it was very difficult for minorities and women to get into higher education. Okay. And so they put affirmative action in place, okay, to try to give opportunities to minorities and women kinds of minorities also, right? Minority groups, the opportunity to get a higher level education, okay? So you'll see that affirmative action plans are very commonplace in schools, right? Harvard, Yale, Princeton, especially those big Ivy League schools, they have had an issue, they've had a history of prejudicial practices, okay? Now, Harvard just got sued and is going through a lawsuit with a particular community over admissions, right? Or a particular group, ethnic group over admissions. Anybody familiar with what group that is?
I don't know.
What'd you say?
I'm not familiar with the group.
Okay. Anybody know? No? Okay. So Harvard got sued by the Asian community, okay? Because they felt that their enrollment had decreased over the past 4 or 5 years based on affirmative action, okay? And the fact that more minorities and women were being accepted into the school, vice them, okay? So a little background, past 15, 20 years, a large portion of the admissions and not most, but in a large number of the big schools, the Ivy League schools, were Asian, specifically Chinese. Okay. And so they enjoyed somewhat, easy accessibility. One was the fact that, the Chinese that were coming over had money. Okay. And they were tied into, the US system and would, somehow negotiate the admission via, some contribution to the school or that kind of thing, right? And get their kids into the school, okay? The second thing was that there was a stereotype that all Chinese students were math geniuses or were STEM geniuses, okay? Which we know is not true, okay? And so all that kind of led to them being accepted at a very high rate to very prestigious schools where other, minority groups were being denied entry based on the fact that, a large portion of the incoming class was mostly Chinese or mostly Asian, okay? And so they enjoyed that for a while, and then affirmative action kind of kicked in, and then also, just the times had changed, and people started complaining about, hey, why is it that, the Chinese just get in very easily, or, some, other Asian groups get in very easily, and you don't have a representation of, all the minority groups at a very high level, right? You look at Harvard, predominantly, you would say 60, 70% of the school, 80% even, was predominantly Caucasian, okay? And then the other 20%, was made up of maybe 15% Asian, some, European or whatever, but at the end of the day, the Asian community made up a large portion of whatever was left, and you had a few minorities here and there that fell into, the African American, Hispanic type demographic, even with women. Okay, all these schools, because you have to remember, all these schools were founded centuries ago, right? And if you really look back at history, women were not allowed to go to school. Women weren't considered smart enough to go to school and to learn and to be doctors and to be lawyers, right? And those people that we see in history that were scientists and lawyers and were made significant contributions to society as women, right? They had to go through a lot to get to that point, right? And so, affirmative action was put in place in order to level the playing field for minorities, which included, women and, other ethnic groups. But the Chinese had a problem with it because it's a zero-sum game. If I'm taking, if I'm accepting less Chinese because I'm accepting, more minority groups, then it's going to affect their numbers, right? And so they thought that that was discriminatory. They thought that it was something that, there's prejudicial practices against them. So they sued Harvard. Harvard got sued. Princeton got sued. I think Yale is in the process of getting sued. So there's a lot, Penn State, I think also. So a lot of these Ivy League schools are not in the midst of lawsuits based on affirmative action, but it's not for the group that you would think it'd be for, right? It's the Asian group. Everyone thinks that it's, mostly African Americans that are, complaining about it. And, a good portion of it is, African Americans, Latino, Hispanic folks, and other ethnic groups, but the Chinese are the ones that actually have filed the lawsuit against affirmative action and how the admission practices have gone, just because they feel that their opportunities have been diminished. Okay. All right. So let me go back. So, like I said, affirmative action program or plan was really put in place, to level the playing field, right? But again, as I mentioned before, the demographics of certain schools, weigh heavily or sway heavily in one direction or another, right? So if you have a program or a school that's 80% anything, right, then you probably have a problem, okay? You probably need to work on your diversity and get the school more reflective of the community that it's in, okay? Because there's no community, as far as, a state, a city, or, well, let me not say that. Major metropolitan areas are very diverse, okay? I'm not talking about little small towns, right? Because that's different. Little small towns can be very, myopic and can be very homogeneous and just be one thing, right? But when you talk about metropolitan cities or, institutions of higher learning, they have to be more diverse, okay? And so, you want to make it as close as possible to what the community looks like, and also it's going to lend itself to contributing to diversity in the workforce, right? Because if they're graduating from all these schools, then their plan is to go into the labor force, right? And if they're going into the labor force, and we have a diverse group of folks going into the labor force, then the labor force will start to become more diverse, okay? Now, there's exceptions to that particular thought, okay? Like for myself, my undergrad, I went to a historically Black college or university, okay? At HBCU. And so those schools have a level of protection as far as it goes for affirmative action, right? The school can be, all African American, but it's not, okay? It's not. They have to adhere to the same rules to a certain degree as any other school. Just because it's an HBCU doesn't mean that, they don't have requirements to, take in students that are not African American. Okay, in my school, we were predominantly African American. I would say about 80%, but we had 20% where it wasn't. Okay, we had Caucasian, we had Latino, we had Asian, we had all kind of different groups within our school, but the school was predominantly African American because of how the school was founded, right? Which is an important aspect that you have to remember, that HBCUs were specifically founded because they could not get into the regular schools. I could not, you couldn't get into a Harvard or a Yale or a Cornell or a USC or wherever, right? Or SDSU, right? And so the uprising or the proliferation of HBCUs is what happened, right? We have, if no one's familiar with HBCUs, some of the popular ones are Howard University in DC, Morehouse in Atlanta, Spelman in Atlanta, which is predominantly for women, and Morehouse is for men. Florida A&M, you probably see the Marching 100, the band, at the football games, at the big football games, and Super Bowl and that kind of thing, right? That's where I went to school at, right? And so there's some really popular ones out there that people are really familiar with, that they heard of, out there. But again, everybody has to adhere to some form of diversity, right? And if the HBCUs don't have a balanced demographic, then they will be subject to affirmative action also, right? So don't think it's just they get a pass, because they don't. Okay. All right. Let me see here. All right. So when we're talking about making sure that we recruit in a ethical and proper way, right? We now, even more so than before, are trying to build a diverse group of applicants, right? We want people from different walks of life, different communities, different backgrounds, all the things that we kind of talked about last week, right? Brings different things to the table, right? I'm not saying that that's necessarily going to benefit the company, for sure, but more than likely, more diversity usually leads to a better company, a better organization, okay? Some of the things that they did in the past to help discriminate. Somebody have a question? No? Okay. Some of the things that they did in the past to discriminate against folks when it came to hiring was, one, they would look at your name, okay? And then from your name, they would try to figure out if they could distinguish your ethnic background or your race, okay? And so that led to the use of kind of like anonymous applications, right? No name, or maybe just a last name, or maybe just a first name or something to that effect. Or even specifically for schools where you put your name on your application, everything, but when it went to the selection process, all the demographic information was removed. The only thing that was on the application was the skill set that the person brought, as far as whether they had a degree or not, where they got the degree, what the degree was in, their work experience, and whether or not they met the job requirements, right? You didn't know if they were a male, female, white, black, Hispanic, tall, short, you had no idea, okay? And so that was put in place specifically to help, people get a fair shot at the job, okay? Companies really have locked down on the organizational culture, of making sure that there aren't any, and it still occurs, but there, there's not an environment in which you come to work where you are subject to racial harassment, sort of, okay, where people aren't, talking to you in a derogatory way and saying, racial slurs or racial epithets, to you, at least not in your face, okay? Not directly to your face, all right? Also, companies really try to make sure that people feel comfortable in their workspace, okay? that I'm not necessarily concerned about being discriminated against because of my gender, because of, you know, my race, right? And so race was kind of the main thing before. Are we still there? What just happened? Great. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can loud and clear.
Okay.
Yes,
sir.
yes,
Can-
we can
All
hear
right,
you.
there it is.
Yeah, clear.
My video froze, so I'm
There is no
sorry.
problem.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, no problem.
So, you know, you try to make sure that the organizational culture is that of inclusiveness, of diversity, of, you know, acceptance, and not, you know, people coming into, you know, a situation where they may be harassed or, you know, talked badly to or treated or mistreated because of, you know, some of one of the protected classes. Okay. If you look across the board in corporate America, all right, I would say 60%, maybe 50, 60% of an organization, most organizations are Caucasian, okay? And so you'll have sprinkles of, you know, women, you have sprinkles of, you know, other minority groups within, you know, the organization. But for the most part, it's predominantly, you know, Caucasian, right? And so, again, there's a push to make it more diverse. Now, the aim is not to eliminate, you know, Caucasians. That's not it, right? The point is to make sure that everybody gets a fair chance and the same opportunities as everyone else. And if it just so happens that the people that are best qualified for the job are Caucasian, then that's the way it is, okay? Because that's really what we have is a shortage of qualified minorities in many instances, right? Because they weren't given the opportunity to excel or succeed, right? Now, nowadays, you have more of an opportunity to you know, do what you want, when you want, how you want, right? Doors are open for minorities and different ethnic groups to succeed, right? When it wasn't, you know, that opportunity before, right? Because of all the things that have been put in place, right? All the laws and regulations, the, you know, the protocols, all the things that have been put in place so that everyone gets a fair shake, everyone gets a fair chance, everybody's on the same level ground as everybody else, right? And so you'll start to see a shift in the demographic of a company, right? Slowly but surely, we start to see a shift, right? Before an organization, you could easily say there was, you know, 90%, 95%, you know, Caucasian. Now it's, you know, down to, I think, maybe 50, 60% Caucasian. And as time goes on, you'll start to see the change, you know, and maybe in your kid's lifetime, it'll be totally heterogeneous, right? It'll be it'll be a mix of folks. If you, I read an interesting National Geographic article, this was some years back, but it was, the article was, the premise of the article was that, what do you think the world is gonna look like in 2050, 2075, right? When we're long gone, what do you think the world's gonna look like, right? And it was interesting to see that for the most part, everybody, because of globalization and the fact that we're more connected, that people were interacting more with different ethnic groups. And that if you have interaction with different ethnic groups or exposed to different groups of people, eventually those people are going to start to mingle and socialize together. They will eventually, you know, procreate together. Okay. There's just no, this is just the natural evolution of life that just, it's just the way it is, okay? And so when they look at or think about how things are going now, you know, how, you know, we have different interracial marriages and different interracial relationships across the globe, the world is gonna look different. You know, in many instances, in certain places, you will not be able to tell what ethnicity a person is or what nationality they are, okay? You'll have to ask them, Okay, whereas that's a little bit easier to determine now in some instances, right? It's easier to see somebody say, oh, okay, that person's African American, as far as race goes, but that doesn't mean ethnically speaking, culturally speaking, that their background is American. Okay, you have to remember that there are different people, different shades of color who are not of a certain group, right? Just because you're white doesn't mean you're American. Okay, just because you're black doesn't mean you're African American. All right, because there are many Hispanics. If you go down to Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Saint Martin. I mean, even if you go to South Africa, all right, most of South Africa, well, not most, large portion of South Africa is white. Okay, so you got to remember to keep those things in mind. And so the study, the paper was very interesting in seeing the evolution of what people are going to look like later on down the line. It was very, enlightening to see that in many places that you're not going to tell who's who, right? And so the discrimination as far as race goes is going to be minimal, right? People are going to get being discriminated other things now. Excuse me, more on background, ethnicity, maybe even gender, and more or less, nowadays, the big one is, sexual orientation. Religion used to be a kind of a high one, but it's not anymore, just because not in the United States anymore, just because the United States has gotten more secular and kind of away from religion. It's not as religious as a country as it used to be. And people have different opinions about religion and God and just having there being a higher power. So that definitely has changed. Okay. All right. Let's take 10 minutes. Come back at let's take 15. Come back at 6:45. Okay.
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 All right. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, is anyone back?
Yes, Professor, I'm here.
Yeah, we're here.
I'm here.
All right, cool. All right, let's get this thing going. All right. All right.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure.
So there's some specific laws that were put in place to address, sex and gender due to the fact that there's, of course, certain things that, are different between male and female. Specifically, males don't get pregnant. Okay, we can't have babies. So there has to be some consideration made for women that when they get pregnant, that they don't get discriminated against. In the past, pregnancy was used as a way to, not hire women, not promote them, not to give them, favorable or good, valuations, not give them, the things that they deserve for their hard work. And so, companies would use, pregnancy as a way in which to say, we can't hire you because you are going to be pregnant. And so if you're pregnant, then you're going to want to leave the office or leave the job, or you may be sick or whatever the case may be. Okay. All very poor excuses and just very poor, behavior from, from men in the past. All right. And so the Pregnancy Discrimination Act was put in place, and it was specifically put in place so that women will be protected and have the same rights as men when it came to hiring, firing, promotions, regardless of if they were pregnant or wanted to get pregnant or, whatever the case may be. And you can tell that, there was a serious problem because, 15, 20 years ago, it was really a very difficult decision, based on the way our society was, kind of structured and going. Many women had to choose between their career and their family. It was really not an opportunity for women to be able to do both, right? Nowadays, there's more of an opportunity for women to, have a family, to have the career, and have all the things, that they want, and have the opportunities, just like men would have, right? And so that wasn't the case, before, right? And so, because of that, women would be treated unfairly. They would just not get considered for certain things. They would get treated poorly in the workplace. People, then they would get talked about, and it would just frowned upon for a woman to think about having a family if she was serious about her career. All right. If she wanted to climb up the corporate ladder, it was difficult already because of the glass ceiling, right? Which we'll, kind of discuss later on down the line. But, on top of that, if you had plans on, having a family and being pregnant, early on in our society, women were seen as, having to stay home and should be the caregivers and take care of the family, and the man should be the one that goes out and makes the money and provides for, for the family, right? So they really talks about gender roles, right, and gender identity, and what are those things that we associate with each gender, right? And so the PDA was put in place, and so that women had no fear in getting pregnant, because what the PDA did was say, look, just because she's pregnant doesn't mean you can fire her. Just because she's pregnant doesn't mean you can't, hire her. We have to protect them in such a way that if she gets pregnant, she knows that, yes, she still needs to come to work, but at some point, her work hours are going to start to, become less and less, because she may not be able to work the whole time. And there's a lot of physical demands on the body when you're pregnant that, you really should not be, maybe standing up. You should be laying down. Everybody's different in how they handle their pregnancy. But the point is that there's, some recourse if you happen to have a hard pregnancy and you need time off, right? And there's no fear that you're going to lose your job, right? So your job is protected, your position is protected, your pay is protected, okay? And you get, maternity leave, okay? And nowadays, based on the Family and Medical Leave Act, the FMLA, women get 12 weeks of, basically, family leave, right? It's unpaid, as the slide says, right? But now we also have that for males. It's paternity leave, right? So not only does the mother get, the woman get 12 weeks unpaid leave, now the father is also eligible, or the males are also eligible for 12 weeks of leave, because the thought is that, yes, the woman is at home and she gets time off, but if you've ever seen a woman after pregnancy, it's not, they're not in the, they need somebody to be there to help them with the child, because they physically probably are not ready to start taking care of someone else right away, right? They may need a couple of days, a week, 2 weeks, depending on, how the pregnancy went, what procedure was done for the pregnancy, right? If you have a C-section, or, they literally cut into your muscle and you can't use those muscles, they have to heal and get back. So the thought is that, hey, the husband needs to be at home, or the father at least needs to be at home, or at least have the ability to assist his, his wife or his girlfriend, whoever it is that the mother is, in the whole process, right? And so now we have 12 weeks for, the males, or paternity leave, which is pretty good, okay? Now, when it comes to FMLA, usually people don't, that's not their first recourse, right? It's not the first thing they go to. People normally go to, paid vacation or any time off that they have, but the key point is that it's paid, and then once they've exhausted that, then they go into FMLA, strictly because FMLA is not paid. And so you basically lose out on 3 months of pay if you take FMLA for the full 12 weeks. The other thing about FMLA is that I can donate my time to another employee. Okay. So say, for instance, me, as as a male in the institution, or even another female, if I know I'm not going to use it, and there's someone else who's in need and who's exhausted their 12 weeks and needs, more time to either, for pregnancy, to help their wife, or the mother of the child, or even for some medical condition, or if you have someone who is in the military and they're, coming back from deployment, you can use FMLA, and you can donate your FMLA to another employee. Okay, so you can donate your 12 weeks or whatever, or a portion of that, whatever you feel comfortable with, to another employee. So that helps out the employees, especially if you're not going to be using that particular benefit. Okay. All right. So the next thing that, is very more gender specific is the Equal Pay Act. All right. And so the Equal Pay Act, I think it's 1963, was put in place because, women were not getting paid the same wages as men for the same work. Okay. And even now, does anybody know what the ratio is? For every dollar that a man makes, how much does a woman make?
Isn't it like 73 cents, or I
Yeah.
can't remember?
Yeah, it's like 73, 75 cents now, right? And this is a huge jump from what it used to be, even 5, 6, 10 years ago, right? It used to be 30 cents, 40 cents, 50 cents for every dollar, okay? And so we've come a long way, but we're still not on equal footing, right? And according to, the research and the statistics that are out there, it won't be till 2050 that men and women will be getting the same pay for the same job, okay? Think about that, 2050, all right? We are now in 2023. So another 27 years before everybody's getting the same pay for the same job, regardless of gender, okay? So it's an important, distinction, because women are doing the same work as men, okay? If you have someone, that you came in with, you got hired at the same time, same degree, same skill set, but they get paid 25 cents or 25 cents more per dollar than you, or per hour, I should say, than you, then you should have a problem with that. Okay. You should demand fair wage for fair pay, for fair work and comparable work, all right? And so you have to keep an eye on that. You have to also keep an eye on the differences when it comes to promotions, right? And increases in pay and performance pay and that kind of thing. The best example I can use that's relevant is when we look at, what's been in the news when it comes to actors and actresses, right? And the disparity in pay between them, right? Where, and I'm just using, Bradley Cooper as just an example. Whether or not he got paid more or not, I don't know. I'm just saying somebody like Bradley Cooper who has name recognition, or Brad Pitt. Let's just say somebody like Brad Pitt, okay? Somebody like Brad Pitt is going to command a certain amount of money, right? But then you have somebody like, his ex-wife, Angelina Jolie, or Jennifer Aniston, or, I don't know, Susan Sarandon, or Jennifer Lawrence, or, all these other great actresses, right? Who are doing the same work, but weren't getting paid the same money, okay? Male actors were getting paid at least 40, 50% more than female actresses, right? For the same work, same hours and everything, right? And so there was, I forgot what the case was. There was a really popular case. It wasn't really a case. It was more of one of the actresses had called out the production company and saying, how are you going to pay him $10 million and then pay me $1 million, right? It was a huge disparity in pay, although the two actors had the same name recognition for the most part. Like, everybody recognized both names, and both actors contributed to, people coming to the movie to watch the movie, because each of them on their own could command, as the leading man or the leading woman, or as the premier or the lead, or whatever the case may be, right? And so that's one area where there's a huge gap in pay, right? There's certain industries that are more prone to having unequal balance of pay, just because they're very hard to break the old paradigm, right? The mindset is really what it is, okay? And as you'll see, if you look back, and look at the leadership of companies and look at, okay, age groups, okay? Baby boomers, as more baby boomers start to die off and we start to get more Gen Xers and Gen Zs into leadership positions, you'll start to see the pay go up more, right? And that's exactly what happened, because the mindset of a baby boomer is different from that of a Gen Xer or a Gen Z or millennial, okay? More liberal, more open-minded, more understanding of, hey, women can do whatever they want to do just as much as men can do whatever they want to do, okay? That wasn't the case early on, basically from the 1990s before, all right? It's just that women were not valued as much, okay? And as we saw in the video last week, that first introductory video I showed you with the professor from the University of Minnesota talking about the origins of HR and that kind of thing, right? The women's value was seen in the home, right? What value did women, have of being a home caregiver, or someone who just took care of the family, right? There's a huge value. If you ever, there's a few research papers out there, a few studies that try to put a value on what it takes, how much should a housewife, right, for lack of a better term, a home caregiver, how much should they make in a salary, okay? Anybody have any guess as to how much someone who, a woman that stays at home and takes care of the family and doesn't work, how much do you think they should get paid?
A lot.
A lot. That is a good answer, a lot, okay? It basically said that if we really had to pay women for the work they do at home, it'd probably run into close to the millions, okay?
A year?
Yes. Because you really can't put a value on raising kids. You can't really put a value on someone coming in or someone being there constantly that's managing a home and cooking, cleaning. You know, it's very not a realistic, you know, figure. Of course, would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But if you really put a price on everything, a home, you know, someone who was at home taking care of the house, you know, everything they did, you'd run close to $1 million, okay? Based on the research that was done. So it may have changed, but it's definitely worth a lot. Once that particular value got taken out of the home, right? Because we became more industrialized and women were taken out of the house and more or less put into, you know, working at manufacturing plants, or if they were given the opportunity. And, you know, nowadays we definitely have more of that, right? We have women in the workforce at a higher rate than we ever had before. Women, if you guys didn't know, there's more women in school than they are men. Okay? So most academic institutions, you know, nowadays, 60%, 70% female, 30% male. Okay? It just there's just a shift, right? Because now you know, our society has, you know, accepted that women are just as smart, just as capable as men to learn science, to be successful, to run companies, to do everything, and also, you know, be, you know, great caregivers and take care of the home, right? So we see that across the board. So as a sense of trivia, right? What country, what industrialized power country or you know, superpower has never had a female leader? Anybody?
No. Maybe Russia.
Russia? Okay, Russia definitely.
Japan.
Who?
Japan doesn't.
Who'd you say? Japan?
Touch
Yeah, okay, Japan. Okay. Who else?
Many of the Middle East countries.
Many of the Middle East countries. Yep, for sure. Okay, definitely. All right. But there's one superpower that is the biggest superpower that's never had a female leader.
Well, that's the United States.
The United States. Okay, United States. United States, for all its greatness and for all, you know, being the, you know, considered, you know, the most powerful country in the world, right? Has never had a female leader. Okay. And a lot of that is due to our, you know, social constructs, the way that, you know, women are viewed. You know, it's just been a long road, right? And we've had instances where women have tried to run for president, right? We've had, you know, Shirley Chisholm, you know, if anybody's familiar with Shirley Chisholm, African-American woman who ran for president and did really well. We had, where is her name? Well, we had Hillary Clinton, of course. And there's another one, I can't remember her name right now, off the top of my head.
We have currently Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris, yeah, Kamala Harris, vice president, right? In line for presidency. That's a good one. Thank you. All right, that's a good one. There's another person that's also another woman that was a pioneer early on, Geraldine Ferraro. Okay, way before your guys' time, right? More or less, just along my age group, maybe, you know, for the majority of the class. But she was, you know, a very strong, you know, contender for the presidential office. Okay, and so again, things have changed. There's more opportunity for women to, you know, be in roles of power. And as we see, Congress, the Senate is expanding into, you know, first, homosexual, you know, senator or congressman, first female, you know, that is, not American, like first, Ethiopian or first Muslim, senator or congressman or state representative, right? And so you have all these different things that are coming into play, and then those people will start to infuse their thoughts and ideas and their struggles and the things that they had to go through. They'll start to infuse that into legislation that will then affect equal pay, all right? That will affect, fair treatment across the board for, everyone, especially people that look like them, right? And so it's coming along, but it's still, we still got some work to do, okay? All right, so pay equity, it kind of the same thing as Equal Pay Act, right? But pay equity is really at the core of the Equal Pay Act, right? It's just making sure that, we pay people for their skill set, right? And that we shouldn't necessarily, differentiate between people because of their gender, okay? If, it's just because maybe their jobs are different, but they still bring the requisite skills, then they should get paid fairly, okay? And they should pay equity, or what we call pay parity, just to make sure that, hey, you bring something to the table and you should get paid for those skills you bring to the table, and your gender or nothing else should matter, okay? Your worth is your worth based on what you bring to the table, what your skill set is, okay? Okay. All right, yeah, we're gonna skip this part. Okay, so as I talked about before, we have the glass ceiling. And the glass ceiling is basically, it's imaginary, as you can assume, right? But basically, when we talk about the glass ceiling, it specifically refers to women. And it's that invisible barrier that stops women from moving up to, senior level positions, okay? Whether it be, that they're just women, and that they can't, make decisions appropriately, or, that they're a minority, or whatever the case may be, okay? You have these glass ceilings where people kind of hit the wall, right? They've hit the pinnacle of where they're gonna be as far as that company goes, right? You can't go any further because this is only reserved for, men, or this is only reserved for, white men, or something like that, to that effect, right? You can't be an executive, you can't be a CFO, you can't be a COO, you can't be CEO, because you're a woman and you're a minority, or you're a minority, right? And so we're not gonna let you move up, right? And so you kind of just stay at a certain level, and you can't get past that particular, barrier, right? So we call that the glass ceiling, right? And so you have women that have shattered the glass ceiling, right? By becoming the first, female vice president that is a minority. Kamala Harris is Jamaican and Indian, okay? So she's the first female vice president that is a minority also, right? She's broken the glass ceiling. She's punched through it, right? Because that is a place where no other woman has been before. They've always got limited, or kind of, pushed back down, right? And couldn't get past that particular ceiling, right? Now we talk about glass elevators, limits that women keep from progressing only in certain fields, right? So there's certain areas or certain industries that have these glass elevators, and they won't allow women to move up, right? Construction is one of the places, or one of the industries, that has been notorious for having glass elevators. They'll let women in, but they won't let them in to certain, to a certain degree, right? They'll only let them in to do certain jobs, and they can't move up anymore, okay? The military is like that, unfortunate for me to say, especially in my former branch of service in the Marine Corps, with, it's very limited. It's opened up recently in the past couple of years, but that's because that, women's groups have sued, and they've done a lot of research to kind of, eliminate or dispel the myths about women not being able to do certain things, right? And so in the military, it's always been that women were not allowed to do anything combat related, okay? Women were not allowed to go to actual physical combat, right? Or be in combat related jobs, I should say, not necessarily they go combat, because they have been in combat, but not being combat related jobs, such as tank driver, right? Or infantry, or artillery or something to that effect, right? Women were never allowed to be in those particular fields in the military because it was thought that it'd be a compromising position for men that were fighting on the front lines to have a woman fighting alongside them, okay? Because it's just I guess from a psychological and just from a standpoint of, is it more impactful if you see a woman shot or blown up, right? And is that going to diminish your capabilities to keep fighting as compared to seeing a man or that happen to a male, right? And so that was the kind of the rationale as to why women were not allowed in combat arms or combat related fields, because they felt that it would have a detrimental effect on the actual field of combat, and that it would have, males would not be able to perform accurately. Not to mention some of the physical requirements that, go with being in combat. It just didn't seem like it would fit on the field of combat. Okay. And so that was, that's been in the kind of the way it is for a long time. It's not till recently that, the first women have been allowed to train with the, infantry training, right? Have been allowed to try out for, special forces and that kind of thing, right? Because does anybody remember the movie G.I. Jane?
More?
Yeah, with
Is that-
Demi Moore. Yep, exactly. Yep. G.I. Jane with Demi Moore, right? It's based on a true story. Okay. Not, a lot of it was kind of exaggerated, but that really did happen, right? There was a real female and she tried out for the special forces and she kind of made it for the most part, but they kind of screwed her along the way and she didn't necessarily get the chance to finish all the way. But she was the first one to really show that women could, endure the training and, some of the physical aspects of special forces and some of the things that we do in special forces, right? Because, in that particular element, there's not a high probability of getting captured, but if you do get captured, the consequences and the kind of the torture that is applied to women is different from what's applied to men, okay? And so that was always taken into account as to, whether or not, we should open the door to women in special forces and those, black ops and those kind of things, right? But we, since in the past couple of years have opened those fields up to women. And then there are now women in infantry units, there are now women, doing jobs that only, they thought only males could do, right? And so it's come a long way, okay? All right, so some ways to break the glass ceiling of glass elevator, okay? You have mentoring programs, you have, people that are in, powers, positions of leadership and power that can start, kind of shaking the tree, trying to make waves, bringing attention to the fact that, hey, women are just as capable as men when it comes to, doing anything in the world, right? Any job, okay? Excuse me, right? Setting goals, right? Having established goals to where, hey, you know what? 10% of your force needs to be women, okay? And in each particular field, you need to have a certain percentage of women, right? And have that established, not by law, but, by policy, in statute, right? And say, you know, we need to have a certain percentage of people within this particular field so that, you know, we start building some foundation of, you know, a group of women that can come in and work and do the same work, you know, do the same thing. And if you ever seen the movie Hidden Figures, has anybody ever seen Hidden Figures?
No, no.
No? Okay. So the Hidden Figures is a movie about three Black women who were involved with the first moon landing. Okay. And it goes into the story about how without these, and they were mathematicians. Without these women, the moon landing wouldn't have been possible. But you never hear about these women because they were women, and secondly, they were African American. So there's two things against them. Okay. But without them, they would never have been able to land on the moon because the math that they did, they're the ones that solved the problems. They're the ones that came up with the solutions that NASA was having, the challenges they were having as far as entry into the atmosphere, entry back into, you know, Earth's atmosphere, you know, rotational pull, gravitational pull around the moon, or how to slingshot back and get into, you know, into the atmosphere. So all these high level mathematical calculations were done by three Black women who, you know, really facilitated the first moon landing, right? And if you get a chance, I would encourage you to watch the movie. It's a very good movie, very interesting, lots of great information. And you see
Oh, I think I remember it. It was I think Taraji P. Henson featured in the movie.
who?
Taraji P. Henson.
Yeah, Taraji. Yeah,
Yeah,
Taraji.
yeah. I remember the movie.
Yep, Taraji's in it, right? She's the kind of the main one that could really solves, that really comes up with the solutions and the concepts, and, you know, does the really high end math that the men couldn't figure out. Okay, so good movie. Check it out if you can. Will give you a lot of insight as to, you know, kind of the struggles and some of the things that, you know, women have had to go through to get to just a level and fair playing field. Okay. All right. So last thing I want to touch on is sexual orientation and its transformation and integration into, you know, our labor force. Okay. Prior to 1990, prior to Bill Clinton, really in 1993, or give or take, right? You know, your sexual orientation in many instances had an impact on, you know, whether or not you got a job. Okay. And so if you were not heterosexual, you had, you know, you had some issues. Okay. If someone found out that you were homosexual, then you probably would be fired or dismissed, or you wouldn't get the job, or you wouldn't get promoted, and that kind of thing, right? And so in 1993, Bill Clinton came up, you know, not came up, but had some legislation specifically for the military, but it kind of got applied across the corporate environment of don't ask, don't tell. Okay. And so the premise behind that was that, look, as an employer, I'm not going to ask you what your orientation is, and you're not going to tell me. Okay. Now, with that came certain rules, right? You can't have any outward presentation of your sexual, you know, orientation, right? You can't go around holding hands with, you know, somebody of the same gender. You can't, you know, talk about your, you know, your love life and in how your, you know, sexual preferences, you know, what you do in your personal life, right? You couldn't talk about that, right? And so, you know, it just became the fact that more and more people were no longer afraid to, you know, not come out of the closet, it's not an appropriate term, but to kind of just let people know, hey, my sexual orientation is this, has no bearing on my ability as a person, has no bearing on my ability as an employee. Okay. Doesn't matter, right? What someone does, you know, in the privacy of their home and who they're with, has no impact on their skill. Okay. And so you have, these laws now that have kind of morphed into different things, right? Now we have, not yet at the federal level. It should be there real soon. I know that the legislation is kind of dangling, but, there's federal protection or will be federal protection for, same-sex marriage, right? Because in the past, let's just say you were in a unconventional same-sex marriage, right? And I'm just using unconventional just from the setting of like, as a society, conventional is, heterosexual, right? But let's say you're an unconventional homosexual or same-sex or same gender relationship or marriage, right? If you happen to work for a company and there's some kind of function you want to bring your husband or your wife or your partner, you really couldn't, right? If something happened to you at work and you had an insurance policy for your significant other, right? Significant other was always thought of as the opposite gender. If you were a man, then your significant other was a woman. If you were a woman, then your significant other was a man, right? But now, if you have your significant other as someone who's the same gender, you'd be disqualified from, getting your insurance. Okay. And so all that took a play and was becoming a problem, right? Because people were saying, you know what, what's it matter, right? I should have the same rights and be protected under the law, regardless of who I'm married to. Okay. And so we had a lot of, hate crimes based on, sexual orientation, a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice. So there was a big push to make sure that within the workplace that these folks were protected, right? These folks that weren't, of conventional sexual orientation, that they got treated fairly also, right? And now you can see it doesn't really matter. No one in the United States anyway, for the most part, in most areas, no one cares, okay? In the workplace, outside the workplace, we have whole areas, in most cities that are, predominantly, gay or considered a gay area, homosexual area, whatever. We have Hillcrest here in San Diego, that's kind of like considered the gay area. We have Greenwich Village in New York, where I grew up in New York, in Brooklyn, not West of Manhattan, but Greenwich Village was known as the area where a lot of the, homosexuals or people that, were in same sex or same, gender relationships. That's where they went to go live because it was a safe environment for them, right? They were amongst themselves. But now there's no really, it's not a big deal anymore, right? Now, because of the laws and some of the things that have been put in place, it's acceptable. It's been accepted by society, even embraced, where we have TV shows and we have, all kind of things that are, done by people that have different sexual orientation than what is considered conventional. Okay, so again, that is a protected class where you cannot discriminate against someone because of sexual orientation. All right. Okay, I'm going to end it here. Any questions? No questions?
No question from me.
All is good, Professor.
Okay, all right. So make sure you get your Ellie in, okay? Make sure you get the quiz done. And then don't forget, think about your groups for the case study, okay? And try to, get that formulated on your own. If not, then I'll step in and I'll put the groups together next week. But I'd like for you guys to do that on your own, okay? Reach out to each other and talk and try to figure out who wants to be in what group or whatever the case may be, okay?
And sir, we have to form how many people in one group?
You can have up to 3 people in your group.
Okay.
Between 3 and 4, right? Well, actually between 2 and 4. Let's say between 2 and 4.
And we have to let you know by next week, correct? About the groups?
Yes, next week.
Okay.
Okay. All right, you can send me an email. Just say, hey, these are the people in my group. And that's fine. I just need one email from one person from each group. Just let me know, hey, these are the people in my group and we're good to go. Okay,
Okay.
if not, then I'll put the groups together next week.
All right, Professor. Thank
All
you.
right. Aside from that, have a good night, and I'll see you next week in class. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
night, Professor. Have a good night. Bye.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night, Professor.
Thank you.
Oh.